For 7 years, I thought I knew her. We built a life together, shared our dreams, our secrets, our love. But now, I've discovered the unthinkable, an affair hidden in the shadows, unfolding behind my back. I've seen the videos, the photos, the truth she tried to bury. What do you do when the person you trusted most becomes a stranger overnight? In the next few minutes, you'll witness betrayal, heartbreak, and a decision that will change everything. This is not just a story of love lost. It's about what happens when the lies come crashing down. From the moment we met, it felt like fate had woven our lives together. 7 years of shared passions, desires, and moments that made me believe she was my soulmate. We aligned effortlessly in everything: sports, travel, entertainment. Her laughter was my comfort, her touch my home. Every time she looked at me, I felt a deep, unspoken understanding pass between us, like we could communicate with a simple glance. For 5 years, everything seemed perfect, but the little cracks that eventually emerged were subtle, so easy to ignore at first. Still, I held on to the idea that what we had was unbreakable, something beyond the reach of the world's usual wear and tear. It wasn't just physical attraction or passion between us. It was the way she anticipated my every need, the way her body molded so naturally against mine. In quiet moments, lying together, I could feel the electric connection under my skin, like our bodies spoke a language of their own. But there was a shift, almost imperceptible, in the way she touched me, or sometimes didn't. Conversations that once flowed freely were now punctuated by awkward silences, and although I felt it, I refused to acknowledge the growing distance. Our love, once a steady flame, had started to flicker, and I was too afraid to ask why. I convinced myself it was just the pressure of work or the inevitable slow drift that happens in long relationships. Her smile still held warmth, but something was missing. There was a hollowness in her embrace, a distraction that I couldn't quite place. Even when we shared a bed, there were nights when her body felt miles away. Yet, I kept telling myself that it was temporary, that whatever we were going through, we would find our way back to each other. But deep down, the fear began to creep in that maybe I was already losing her without even realizing it. At first, it seemed like everything was fine until she started talking about him. Mike, the new supervisor at her job. Her eyes lit up when she mentioned how funny he was, how everyone seemed to adore him. Initially, I dismissed it, thinking it was just normal excitement about a new colleague. But as the days passed, his name came up more frequently in our conversations. The way she spoke about him held a different kind of energy, and every mention sparked a quiet discomfort deep inside me. That initial feeling of unease was small, but it grew, gnawing at my peace, like a faint alarm that only I could hear. Her once unwavering presence began to fade. She became distant, retreating into her phone or staying late at work. Our evenings, once filled with laughter and intimacy, grew colder. I tried to reach out to her, to bridge the growing gap between us, but she always seemed elsewhere, mentally, emotionally. When I kissed her, there was a hesitance, a certain absence in her lips that I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just about sex or physical closeness. It was the emotional bond that was slipping away. The longer it went on, the more I felt like a stranger in my own relationship. I found myself lying awake at night, wondering what had changed. Was it me? Had I stopped being enough for her? The questions circled in my mind, each one twisting the knife of doubt deeper into my heart. I started watching her closely, trying to decipher the small signs. Her once eager touch now felt obligatory, and the warmth in her eyes was replaced with something I couldn't quite place. I didn't want to believe that Mike had anything to do with it, but the seed of suspicion had already been planted, and with each passing day it grew. We had planned to visit Dennis, our mutual friend who had been going through a tough time. Dennis needed us, and it felt important to be there for him, together. That evening, I waited for her to come home, but as the minutes ticked by, my phone remained silent. I sent her messages, called, but there was no response. At first, I tried to brush off the unease. Maybe work had held her up. Maybe she was just caught in traffic. But as the hours passed, that small pit of worry in my stomach began to twist and churn, fed by the growing silence from her end. By the time I decided to go visit Dennis on my own, I was already fighting off a sense of dread that something was wrong. The visit with him was meant to be a distraction, but my mind kept wandering back to her absence. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her, offering some explanation, but it was never her. As Dennis and I sat in awkward conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't meant to know about. My heart felt heavy, torn between concern for my friend and the dark thoughts invading my mind about my wife. When I finally got home, she still wasn't there. I paced the living room, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. What if something had happened to her? An accident, maybe? Or worse, what if she was with him? I dialed her colleague, Janice, desperate for answers. And that's when my worst fears began to solidify. Janice casually mentioned that my wife had stayed late at work alone with Mike. The unease that had quietly grown inside me for weeks now screamed, leaving no room for doubt. Something wasn't right, and I was about to face the truth. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of dread. She started coming home later than usual, always with vague excuses that left me more anxious than reassured. I watched her closely, every glance at her phone, every text message she tried to hide, feeding my suspicions. When I asked who was messaging her, she'd brush it off. Just a friend from work, she'd say, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But every time Mike's name came up, I could see her stiffen. It wasn't paranoia anymore. Something was happening, and I was starting to feel powerless against it. The intimacy between us, once so natural, had become a distant memory. Our conversations were shallow, forced, and I could see the warmth we once shared slipping away, little by little. She became defensive whenever I tried to bring up what was bothering me. I watched as she pulled further into herself, leaving me on the outside, desperate for answers but too afraid to confront the full truth. Her touch, once filled with affection, now felt obligatory. I started piecing together all the little signs I had ignored, and the picture that formed wasn't something I wanted to believe. Late one night, after she had fallen asleep, I found myself staring at her phone. The temptation to look through her messages burned inside me. Every instinct told me that I needed to know, but I didn't touch it. Not yet. I wanted to trust her, even as my gut screamed for the truth. I told myself that I was overreacting, that maybe I was just seeing things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew the truth was something I couldn't hide from forever. Every day that passed made the distance between us feel more permanent, more irreversible. The doubt gnawed at me every night, relentless. I needed proof, something concrete to confirm the suspicions that were slowly eating me alive. I hated myself for it, but I decided to take drastic measures. Late one evening, after another of her silent returns, I installed a tracker in her car. It felt wrong, invasive, but the need for answers outweighed the guilt. I kept telling myself that I wasn't the villain here. If she was hiding something from me, I deserved to know. The tracker would give me clarity, no matter how painful it turned out to be. The following night, I told her I'd be working late. She kissed me goodbye, but her lips felt cold, distant, just like the growing gap between us. As soon as she left, I sat in my car, watching the tracker app. When her car moved, so did I, following at a distance. She didn't go to any place I recognized. Instead, she drove to a remote parking lot, isolated and dimly lit. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum, each beat louder as I watched her pull into a dark corner. Then, just as I feared, Mike's car appeared. The confirmation hit me like a tidal wave, cold and unforgiving. She got out of her car and slipped into his, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched from a distance, stomach twisting as I recorded everything. The anger, the betrayal, all of it burned inside me, but in that moment I was numb. I had seen enough. I turned off the camera, knowing the truth now lived in the pit of my gut. There was no going back from this. The woman I thought I knew had betrayed me, and now I had the proof. Even after witnessing the affair, part of me still clung to disbelief. I needed something more, something undeniable. One night, while she was out, I searched the house, desperate for more answers. My hands shook as I rummaged through drawers and closets, trying to hold on to whatever composure I had left. That's when I found it. Her iPad buried deep in a drawer, untouched and unlocked. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity and pain overwhelmed any sense of guilt. I opened it, knowing I might find exactly what I feared most, but hoping, somehow, that I wouldn't. The images and videos I found shattered whatever was left of my trust. They weren't just casual moments between her and Mike. They were intimate, raw, and explicit. My stomach twisted as I watched her with him, in ways that she used to be with me. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was how comfortable she looked, how natural it seemed. She had hidden this life from me, and the proof was staring back from the screen. The depth of her deception was far worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just an affair, it was a double life, one she had kept so carefully hidden. I closed the iPad, my body trembling, the weight of what I had seen pressed down on me, suffocating. I felt sick, disgusted, not just with her, but with myself for having been blind to it all for so long. The evidence was undeniable, and there was no room left for doubt. My mind raced, flooded with anger, hurt, and the overwhelming need to confront her. But in that moment, as I stared at the cold, hard proof of her betrayal, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever we had was dead. There was no saving it now. After everything I had seen, the videos, the messages, the lies, there was no way to continue. The realization hit me like a final blow. Our marriage was over. I sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers laid out in front of me, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. This wasn't how I had imagined our story ending, but it had to. The love we once shared was gone, replaced by deceit and distance. I removed my wedding ring, setting it gently on the table. It was time to walk away from this life, from her, and from the pain. Leaving wasn't easy. The memories we shared haunted me as I packed my things. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt cold and empty. Each room reminded me of moments we'd never get back. But I knew that staying meant living a lie. I moved in with a friend, seeking peace, clarity, and a chance to heal. As I drove away from the house, a strange sense of freedom washed over me. It was painful, yes, but I finally felt like I could breathe again, unburdened by the weight of her betrayal. That first night in my friend's guest room, I lay awake for hours, replaying everything in my mind. The decision to leave had been the hardest of my life, but it was the only way forward. I couldn't live in the shadow of her lies anymore. Our marriage had crumbled, and I needed to focus on myself now, on rebuilding, on finding peace. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I had made the right choice. It was time to let go of the past and start again, no matter how hard that journey would be. Not long after I left the divorce papers on the kitchen table, the messages started pouring in. At first, it was a simple, "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I ignored it, feeling numb. But then came more messages, each one pleading for forgiveness, for a chance to explain, to fix things. She said she still loved me, that what happened had been a mistake. But the words felt empty, like hollow echoes of a love that no longer existed. The betrayal was too deep, and nothing she said could erase what I had seen. As the days passed, her desperation grew. She sent longer messages, begging me to meet her, to give her just one chance to talk. I stayed silent, watching the notifications pile up on my phone, each one a painful reminder of what we had lost. I knew she was sorry, but I also knew the sudden guilt only surfaced after I had made my decision. It wasn't about love. It was about her trying to salvage the life she had destroyed. I could see that clearly now, and I refused to let her pull me back into the wreckage. She tried to call, even came by my friend's house once, but I wasn't ready to face her. Every message, every attempt at reconciliation felt like salt in the wound. She wanted forgiveness, but I couldn't give it to her. The months of lies, the images burned into my mind, were too much to forgive. It was clear that she wasn't trying to fix the relationship. She was trying to fix her conscience, and I wasn't going to be part of that. The only thing I wanted now was distance from her, from the memories, from the pain. After weeks of her constant pleas, I finally agreed to meet, not because I was reconsidering, but because I needed closure. We arranged to meet in a neutral place, somewhere we could talk without the weight of our home pressing down on us. I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe she would offer more apologies, more excuses. Maybe she would confess everything. But as I saw her walk in, I realized it didn't matter. Nothing she said could change what had happened, and I was here just to hear it, not to forgive it. She started talking as soon as we sat down. Her words spilled out quickly, an apology mixed with explanations. She admitted to the affair, said Mike made her feel special, alive, in ways she hadn't felt in years. She confessed that it wasn't about love, but about feeling desired again. As she spoke, her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw the guilt in her eyes. But instead of feeling sorry for her, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had been dreading this meeting, but hearing her say it out loud made the truth feel final, like a door closing. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk, let her try to explain, but in the end, it was all just noise. Nothing she said could bring back the trust she had shattered. When she finished, I told her plainly, there was no going back. I saw the hope drain from her face, but I didn't flinch. I had come here to end things, not to rekindle what was dead. She had made her choices, and now we were both living with the consequences. This meeting wasn't about reconciliation. It was about closure. And for me, that was all I needed. The conversation shifted as I brought up the photos and videos. I asked her if she knew that I had seen everything. Her face instantly paled, and her eyes widened with a mix of fear and shame. She hadn't expected this. For a moment, she tried to deny it, but the panic in her expression told me she knew exactly what I was talking about. When I mentioned the explicit details, she broke down, tears streaming down her face, sobbing as though she finally grasped the gravity of her betrayal. But for me, her tears came too late. I pressed on, asking how she could have done it, how she could have allowed herself to fall so far from who I thought she was. Her explanations were vague, scattered. She said she felt lost, that Mike had manipulated her into believing it was harmless fun, something exciting, something that didn't mean anything, but it had meant something to me. Those images were burned into my mind, and they had destroyed the version of her I once loved. She tried to minimize it, but the damage was done. No amount of justification could undo what I had seen. As she wept, trying to beg for forgiveness, I realized that I didn't even recognize her anymore. The woman in those videos wasn't the person I thought I had married. The affair wasn't just physical. It was a complete betrayal of our values, of the life we had built together. It wasn't just the sex. It was the lies, the deception, and the fact that she had shared her most intimate moments with someone else. I told her that I could never unsee what I had seen, and as she fell silent, I knew there was no future left for us. After that confrontation, I found myself drowning in reflection. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head, the moments we shared, the life we had built, and how it had all crumbled so quickly. I kept asking myself the same questions. Was she really manipulated by Mike, or had this been a conscious choice all along? It was hard to reconcile the woman I had loved for years with the person she had become. The images haunted me, not just because of the betrayal, but because they revealed a side of her I never knew existed. It was like waking up from a dream and realizing everything had been a lie. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Maybe there had been signs all along. Small moments where I had felt the distance growing, the conversations becoming shallow, the intimacy fading. But I had chosen to ignore them, clinging to the hope that what we had was strong enough to weather anything. Now, with the weight of the truth crushing me, I saw it for what it really was, a fragile relationship that had broken long before I was willing to admit. I had been blind, and now I was paying the price for it, despite everything. Part of me couldn't help but wonder if I had failed her in some way. Could I have done something differently? Could I have stopped her from drifting away if I had paid more attention? These questions kept me up at night, twisting inside me like a knife. But no matter how much I reflected, the answer remained the same. She had made her choices. She had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The love we once shared was gone, and there was no way to rebuild what had been so thoroughly destroyed. The decision came quietly, but with a firmness I couldn't ignore. There was no more hope for reconciliation, no chance of rebuilding what had been shattered. The trust between us had been destroyed, and without it, there was nothing left to salvage. Even as she continued to ask for another chance, I knew I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at her, all I saw were the lies, the betrayal, and the image of her with him. She wanted forgiveness, but I couldn't give it. The hurt ran too deep, and I knew I could never see her the same way again. The divorce process had already begun, and with each step, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the pain, the doubt, and the endless questions that had haunted me for months. I knew I deserved better than to live in the shadow of her choices. This wasn't about pride or anger anymore. It was about self-preservation. I needed to move forward, to reclaim my life without the constant reminder of her betrayal. My decision was final, and I felt lighter for having made it. She kept trying, of course, sending messages, asking to talk, begging for forgiveness. But it was all futile. My mind was made up, and nothing she said or did could change that. There was no way to fix what had been broken. The love we had once shared was now just a distant memory, something that belonged to the past. I had to think about my future, about my own peace of mind. And in that future, she had no place. I didn't hate her anymore. I just didn't care. It was time to let go and move on. With everything finally coming to an end, I feel ready to move forward. The relationship that once brought me so much happiness and fulfillment had dissolved beyond repair. But that didn't mean my life had to stop. In fact, for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity about what lay ahead. She had made her choices, and now I had made mine. The divorce was just a formality at this point, a necessary step to close this chapter for good. As much as it hurt, I knew this was the only way to truly heal. I've heard she's been seeking therapy, trying to deal with what happened. Good for her, but I no longer concern myself with her recovery. My focus is on me now, on finding peace, rediscovering joy, and rebuilding the parts of my life that she broke. There's no going back, no salvaging what's been lost. That life, that marriage, is behind me, and while it will always leave a mark, it won't define who I am going forward. My happiness, my peace, depends on no one but me. I'm walking away, free from the past. Looking toward the future, I feel a mix of uncertainty and hope. I know the road ahead won't be easy, but I'm ready to face it. The divorce will be finalized soon, and with it, a new beginning. The wounds are still fresh, but I trust they'll heal over time. What matters now is that I've learned something invaluable. My worth isn't tied to anyone else. I'm stronger than I ever thought, and that realization is the key to moving forward. The past is over, and the future is mine to shape.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.